Hey guys, I am super appreciative for everyone who's come over to this now third channel and joined in with me on this like big journey of being able to produce these books and be able to produce a lot of artwork for them. It's been crazy just seeing the people commenting and encouraging me and wanting more information. So it's something that I thought I'd do because I have nearly 100 pieces of art is go over some of the art that I've had commissioned and maybe dive into it a little bit more so you guys can get a sense of my world and my characters and the settings for the books that you may or may not end up reading. Cross my fingers for it. Because there's quite a lot. So we're gonna start off first with an immaculate map that I had made for the northern continent of my world. So there's two main continents, very simply the north and the south. And this is a pretty amazing, like I said, representation done by a guy named Daniel's Maps. Well, that's his website. So here we have the Empire of Vaemon. This is where my most recent book takes place in, and it's where my upcoming book, By Right of Conquest, will also take place in. So each of these regions, these aren't individual kingdoms. These are all countries within one empire, right? And the center of the empire is here in the Crown Lands. Now that I think about it, I actually have art for the Crown Lands as well. So one of the things that I really wanted to do in my book, across all my books, is kind of merge together the fantastical and the mystical, but also the realistic. So the Crown Lands are actually supposed to be the most fantastical place in pretty much the entirety of my world. They're right here. And funny enough, you're going to see like these spaces right here and these spaces down here. So you can think of these as essentially being like magically radioactive. This is the crumbling rock up here. And then this spot is known as the Devil's Tooth. And they are some of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous places in the entire world. And this section of the northern continent called the Trimarches has a lot of the fallout from being so close to the crumbling rock. I'm not going to get super into it, but it's basically an ever growing and crumbling series of islands that houses the remnants of a precursor civilization, you know, like a fallen, basically super city that was destroyed and nobody knows how. Same thing for down here, except down here, for some reason, even though the Crown Lands has such proximity to it, it's almost like the reverse has happened. And this spot on the map is immaculate, like a paradise. And so that's why it looks like this. Huge crystals all around. You have unicorns. It's not shown, but there's like phoenixes. It's very magical. You have trees going up on like the sides of mountains. It's a paradise, you know, full of all sorts of technology and innovations that you would not expect to find in a medieval world. Nothing is modern, but for example, they have street lights and pavement, right? The reason for that is because this spot right here, the crumbling rock, and then this spot over here, the Devil's Tooth, because they were precursor civilizations, there's a ton of advanced technology. And a huge part of the culture of Vaemon, which is this continent, is for people to become adults, they have to complete the rite. And the rite is going into one of these two places, either the Devil's Tooth or the crumbling rock, and they bring back something of value. The more valuable something you bring back, the more fame and renown you're going to have as you ascend into adulthood. And much of what these people bring back is knowledge, it's innovations, it's technology, which has allowed them in Vaemon to craft things that, again, huge portions of the world wouldn't be able to discover for decades or probably centuries. And so this is the land that, again, my most recent book and my next book is based in. And it is one unified empire that's bigger than a lot of my other countries. And the book that is coming out later in this year is actually a war to take over this entire thing. A huge civil war, in fact. And you'll actually be going to pretty much every single one of these different countries and meeting the families that rule them, following our main characters. But the thing that I kind of wanted to talk about today is a little bit of the culture of Vaymon. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of it because it's just too vast and too large for me to do that in one sitting. But there are some pieces of art that I think could be very interesting for you guys to kind of like dive into with me. And so first and foremost is just the architecture and kind of like the way that the civilization is set up. So this is Vonika city, and it's the largest city in the world. So a lot of my history in the world, I took a page out of many different authors from before me, is paralleled. The history of my world is paralleled to real world history, right? So there was the capital, which is the Crown Lands, and the family who ruled the Crown Lands were very Roman inspired. And one member of that family thought, well, if this place is already perfect, I want to go and prove that I can make a place that's even better, right? So this is based off of the, oh gosh, I forget which Roman emperor it was. Oh, it was Constantine, who went from Rome and decided to make basically a new Roman capital, which was Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. And his whole idea was to create a city that was exemplifying his grandeur. You know, it says Constantine. And so that's what happened here. This is the Conquer, which is the capital that the Vamese emperors have always lived in. And it's the biggest, largest, this is like literally all one castle. I mean, you can't even see all of it here. But this is the type of spot that the royal families of Vaymon, and there have been multiple, have lived in. And again, without getting too deep into it, because there's so much lore, one of these royals decided, I'm going to make something different. And he established the city of Vonika, which is what you see here. And Vonika is named after their dragon goddess, Verunica. The name actually is supposed to be very similar to Thessalonica, but just with some fantasy speak. And what you're going to notice here is a lot of really kind of like dragon-esque and like high fantasy imagery. And that's a huge part of the North and my stories. So as some background, my first 5 books did not have any dragons in them. I've talked about this a little bit. But I really wanted to write dragons. That's one of the main reasons I even got into fantasy fiction in the first place. But I realized that the stories that I wanted to tell didn't revolve around dragons. So for like the first, like, gosh, 6 years of me writing, I basically sat on my hands and said, just because I want to do this thing doesn't mean it's the best for me as a writer, and doesn't mean it's best for me in creating this story. But when I got to the point where I could focus on a dragon-centric society, or at least a dragon-influenced society, I kind of jumped at it. And that's a lot of what happens in the North. This whole kind of like series that I'm doing takes place across like multiple different spans of time, right? So this image right here is actually from the wedding celebration for something I'm not going to spoil, but for some of the characters in my books. And it happens about, I think, 70 to 80 years before the events of my most like current main book, which is Blood of One's Blood. And the reason I explain all this is because that multiple families over the years have come to rule Vaymon. That's kind of one of the hallmarks of the empire, is that there is a way of becoming royal, and it's called literally by right of conquest. There's by right of blood, and there's by right of conquest. And by right of blood is when you're born into the leadership. By right of conquest is when you take over leadership. And both are seen as equally valid. But conquest is seen as the main way of doing it, because the Vamese believe that you take what is yours and you defend what is yours. So if you conquer the whole empire, and you take the throne, you're actually not just called the Emperor of Vaemon, you're called the Emperor Supreme, right? So it's kind of like you are even greater than an emperor because of being able to do it in the most Vaemese northern way. So that's why my book is called By Right of Conquest. This is the sequel, actually, to Imperius, which I'll find for you guys right now. Yeah, this is the cover art for Imperius, just without the text. And again, because I made sure that these stories were very dragon-centric because they finally took place in a land with dragons in it. Only the northern continent has dragons. The southern continent does not. And all of my stories previously had been based in the southern continent. So this is kind of like my chance to really explore and to dive in. And these characters are all really significant. But again, not to get too sidetracked, it's so hard having all this amazing artwork and trying to figure out what specifically to talk about at any one time. But Vaemon as a whole has been ruled by like 2 dozen different royal families, each coming into the throne by different methods. But the one to rule the longest was actually House Cayman, and I can get art for them too, since I guess I should have already. So this is some art that I've had done for the Caymans. You'll notice, very Roman inspired, and they were able to tame dragons. This is very similar, I think, to a true near and dear fiction to me and probably like the rest of the world. Game of Thrones, the Valyrians were modeled highly after Roman and Greek culture, and I thought that was really cool, but I wanted to be able to I think put my own twist onto it and not just have it be that there's a whole civilization of, you know, Greeks and Romans that are dragon tamers, but kind of like use it to turn it into something, again, unique. So you're going to notice here, even though this is, you know, supposed to be like a Greek or Roman emperor, looks very Africanized. And that's because of how the Caymans interacted with eugenics, basically. Again, without getting too much into it, they had looked to southern countries and had seen that some people in the southern countries had power over fire, basically firebenders. And they thought, well, we like dragons, and the dragons in my world, for the most part, can't breathe fire. There's like 1 in every 1,000 that can. And so the Cayman, they're called imperators. They thought, if we could have kids with these people who can use fire, that means we would be able to use fire and we would be more like dragons. And these people who could use fire were more African. And so they actually brought them over, they had kids, and many of the Caymans eventually started looking like this. This actually has some similarities to real world history, you know, like Roman and Greek civilization is like right on the border of pretty much the Mediterranean, Africa, and the Middle East. And you have a ton of different interplay and intermarrying between families there historically. And I thought that was pretty cool oftentimes because you don't largely get to see Africanized looking individuals in fiction if they aren't kind of like stereotypically tribal. And seeing them like this as more kind of like regal Roman emperors and whatnot, I think is a very nice take on it. And so that's what some of my characters actually are descended from, their family. And so you're going to notice here, this is one of the main characters of my book, and she is, as you can see, a black woman, but very much still, I think, keeping in line with those draconic features that you could see even in her dress, which is supposed to be like scales. I won't get into exactly why this art is the way it is, because again, I don't want to spoil anything for the book that is going to come out, but you can kind of see through hundreds and hundreds of years, it's this continued idea of being able to make sure the bloodline stays with people who can use fire. And so this is the type of individual that kind of like represents House Cayman now, which is those people who had conquered like the entire northern continent. Well, if we're being specific, they conquered like half of it and then kind of like forced the other half into servitude. But again, too much lore to go into. But all of this is to say, dragons play like a really big part in how I even conceived of the peoples culture, their architecture, and how they think of themselves. Because dragons are a symbol of power, but only the Caymans knew how to tame them, right? So the people and the nobles of Vaemon lost the ability to kind of use their most significant symbol of power, right? It's unique to them, it's unique to their culture. And dragons still exist like far and wide. There's plenty of them. You know, this is an example of one of the dragons that actually appears in my book. This is another breed of dragon, but the problem is nobody knows how to tame them. Right? These are some other dragons that appear, and because of this, they have kind of like memorialized dragons as a symbol of power within the architecture. So these buildings are many hundreds of years old, because again, like I've said, the people who ruled as royals have always lived in the Crown Lands, and this building right here is the Conqueror, which is the seat of power in like kind of like the middle of the Crown Lands. And so what has actually happened is that every different family who's come to live within the Conqueror has built up around the main structure. And so that's why it's so big. It's stood for, you know, thousands of years, and has been added on and kept up by every family who has moved into it. So you're going to see in the center is almost this kind of like elvish style of architecture, because the people who originally constructed the Conqueror are believed to perhaps be demigods or some other type of supernatural being. And as you move away from some of the older construction, you're going to get into more traditional kind of like Roman architecture mixed with Grecian, mixed with that kind of like European, right? Because the idea is everyone has been added on, but you could see little like icons and nods to different things as you look through the art. And again, I've had some phenomenal artists help me out on all this stuff. But when I say like a ton of time and attention has been put into, I think, all the art pieces that have kind of like been used to, I think, explore deeper into this world, I really mean it. And here you can kind of see how dragons even started out, because they were not like this at the very beginning. These are like hundreds of years of perfect breeding, creating these animals. How dragons started out is much more like lizards. So they're actually based off of Komodo dragons, as you can see just from the face here. And so this would be kind of like in the middle line of them being genetically bred to have the qualities that like dragon tamers would want. There are animals in my world called grand animals, and they're anywhere between twice to 10 times as big as their regular counterparts, right? So there's grand bats, grand stallions, grand eagles, all that kind of stuff. And so here we see a grand lizard, and these were eventually bred to become smarter, faster, bigger. This is where we get the differentiation in the species. So you have stuff like this, which is an imperious dragon, which is what the royals would ride, the Cayman royals, the first dragon riders. And then you have something like this, which is a Tyrannus dragon, which is what another family, House Thaladamus, would ride. All different sorts of breeds of dragons, and they all come together to, let's see, and they all kind of come together to give like an identity to the North and how Northerners think about like their own power. Some Northerners are very against the idea of dragons being used as a symbol, as a national identity, mainly because a lot of the times dragons are tied to the religion of dragons, and the dragon goddess Vorunia, while others see them just as the physical manifestation of how tough and resilient the North is. So this is why oftentimes you'll even get emperors, let me see if I can find it, who dress themselves in like dragon attire, because a lot of them actually have been survived from families from the times of when dragons were much more populated, when it's called the Imperium of Vorunia. The families have descended and been around that long. right? And so you're gonna see here, he has like dragon shoulder blades. And this kind of crown is reminiscent of the crown on the heads of the Imperius right here, right? So, I mean, obviously there's almost too much artwork to be able to even go over. And this is one of the main characters from my books. This is actually an incredibly important character, and his dragon companion. That's what my latest books follow, is this guy named Derek with the dragon Jonan, who we see here. Where is it? This is him, and he eventually gets very big. He gets quite large. But if you guys like this and wanted to hear a bit more, again, because there's quite literally too much information for me to even like begin to go over in these types of videos, I'd love to have questions or be directed on anything you guys want me to talk about. So hope you guys enjoyed some of the art that I've commissioned. If you want me to talk about any one piece of art more specifically too, go for it, or any one aspect of the world. It might be a very long video because it's a lot, but I'd be more than happy to do it. So thanks for watching.